with some good news. I just checked before I enter the stage, and it's definite now, this meeting we will have here this evening will not be cancelled. And I'm very happy indeed to be in beautiful Sydney today. The city, unfortunately, also where last September Al-Qaeda sympathizers shouted, and I quote, "Our dead are in paradise, your dead are in hell," and where indoctrinated young Islamic children paraded banners declaring, "Behead all those who insult the Prophet." Sydney is also the city where already more than 60 mosques are present today. It's the city where Karnita Matthews, an Islamic convert, drove around in a burqa and intimidated the police. It's the Australian city where Islamization has progressed the furthest. And this city, ladies and gentlemen, this city needs to hear the truth about the dangerous ideology of Islam. But before I start my speech, allow me to thank the Q Society for inviting me to Australia. Thank you, Debbie. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Ralph. Thank you, all the other volunteers, for making this visit possible. You did a tremendous job, and it was far from easy. Poor Debbie. Poor Debbie, where's Debbie? There. Poor Debbie, she never booked so many venues in her life. And she never had so much cancellations in her life. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me for a well-deserved applause for Debbie. My friends, for being here tonight. Thank you for coming to listen to me and to making up your own mind about who I am and what I really stand for, based on my own words and not on hearsay or biased media reports. You are. Thank you. You are the living proof of the brave Anzac spirit for which we in Europe know Australia, and it's still alive. My dear friends, no doubt you all know the joke of the man who flew to Australia, and coming through immigration he was asked if he had a criminal record. And he answered, "I didn't know I still needed one to get in." And actually, I thought that was a joke. But there seems to be a lot of truth still today in that story. If you are an Islamic hate monger, it's very easy to get a visa to Australia. You get it even in a day. Even if you go choose rats, apes and monkeys, or the scum of the human race, as Sheikh Abdul Rahman Al Saudi said, and he will be visiting your city in a few weeks' time. He gets a visa within a day. I had to wait for 5 weeks. So next time I come to Australia and I need a visa, I will consider dressing up as the Grand Imam of Mecca. Anyway, I am here today, and I'm here with a message that your political leaders do not want you to hear. Let me first tell you something about myself. I am indeed a politician from the Netherlands, representing almost 1 million voters and 10% of the electoral voice. I'm the leader of the third largest political party and the leader of the biggest opposition party. I have spoken earlier in the premises of the United States Senate, the British House of Lords, the Israeli Knesset, the Danish Parliament, and many other conferences all over the world, where I met and discussed my views with like-minded people and politicians, none of whom belong to the far-right fringe. And perhaps many of you think that life for me as a politician in the Netherlands resembles the life of your own members of your own federal parliament. Unfortunately, I wish that was true, but it's not the case. And it's not the case because in the last 9 years I have been living under 24-hour police protection. Wherever I go, also today, plainclothes officers accompany me, protect me. I live in a government safe house, bulletproof and safer than the Dutch National Bank. Unfortunately, I don't have the money. This is the money. My wife and I had to live in prison cells in army barracks just to be safe from assassins. Assassins who claim to represent the religion of peace, but walk around with pistols and knives. And who am I that I need this protection? I'm not a president. I'm not a king. I'm a mere parliamentarian. I have, however, been marked for death because I criticize Islam. I was placed under police protection in the year 2004 when an Islamic fanatic threatened to murder me because I had criticized Islam. And what have I done, you may ask, to deserve those kind of death threats? The only thing I did is candidly express my views about Islam, because I believe that Islam is rather than a religion, predominantly a totalitarian ideology striving for world dominance. I believe that Islam and freedom are incompatible. I believe that Islam is a threat and a danger to our free societies. And some people do not want to hear this message. And that is why they threaten people to kill them. All those people who tell the truth about Islam. And I'm unfortunately not the only one. You all know the British author Salman Rushdie, but there are also several cartoonists who all have been the victims of assassination attempts. And even 2 weeks ago, there was a murder attempt in Denmark on my good friend, the journalist and Islam critic Lars Hedegaard. And they fear, ladies and gentlemen, they fear our pens and our words. And because they want to silence us, they try to kill us. Winston Churchill, you all know Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill once called Islam a militant faith and a retrograde force. Winston Churchill compared Hitler's Mein Kampf to the Quran, which he called the new Quran of faith and war. And some journalists ask me, Mr. Wilders, how dare you? How dare you compare the Quran to Mein Kampf? That is so intolerant. And to all of them, I say, I prefer the so-called intolerance of Churchill over the so-called peace of Islam, which is known. Ladies and gentlemen, Islam leads Europe back to barbarism. Islam is a force of darkness. The way to liberate ourselves from darkness is by lighting a light. And that is why we speak. To let the light of the truth shine over Islam. That is why we speak. And that is why I have come to Australia to speak, but also to urge you all to speak the truth. If you really love freedom, you have to speak the truth. If not, you will fall victim to Islam, like earlier people did in the Middle East, in Northern Africa, in Persia, in Indonesia, and in India. And that is why I spoke, why I speak, and why I will continue to speak, whatever the threats and whatever the consequences. Because I do not want us to live and our societies to be free. And in Europe, we are experiencing that the more Islamic a society becomes, the less free and tolerant it will be, even when the majority of the Muslims are moderate. Certain parts of our inner cities no longer look like Europe. They look like the suburbs of Cairo, of Rabat, of Damascus, or even Mecca. We are in Europe today, and I'm not exaggerating, confronted with headscarves, with burqas, with polygamy, with female genital mutilation, with honor killings. Mohammed is today the most popular name among newborn boys in many French, Belgian, and Dutch cities. It is even the most popular name among all the newborns in England and Wales today. A lot of people don't know that. It's the truth. Last month, a group called Muslim Patrol posted a video on YouTube. I don't know if you have seen it, but that it showed how they control an entire neighborhood of the British capital, London. They intimidate people, force women, also non-Muslim, to cover up, target gays, confiscate alcohol, and forbid non-Muslims to walk past the local mosque. And during the past 3 decades, so many people rooted in a culture entirely different from our own Judeo-Christian and humanist tradition have entered Europe. That our heritage, our freedom, and our cultures indeed are in danger. And let me give you a few examples. 2 years ago, a high-ranking German police officer admitted that no-go zones outside police authority are proliferating all over Germany. In France, in the Mediterranean countries, in the Low Countries, in Scandinavia, there are areas where the police no longer dare to enter. In each one of our cities, wrote the well-known Italian author Oriana Fallaci shortly before she died in the year 2006, in each one of our cities there is a second city, a state within a state, a government within the government, a Muslim city, a city ruled by the Quran. End of quote. And Oriana Fallaci, ladies and gentlemen, was fully correct. I used myself to live in the neighborhood of Kanaleiland, of Utrecht, the 4th biggest city of the Netherlands, a suburb. In 20 years that I lived there, it transformed into a very dangerous neighborhood for non-Muslims. People are robbed, people have to run for their safety. And this same kind of transformation of our cities has happened in parts of Amsterdam, of Rotterdam, in so many cities of the Netherlands, but also in Belgium, in Germany, in Britain, in France, in Spain, in Italy, in Sweden. Almost every country in Europe has experienced the same. In France even, the authorities have drawn up a list of so-called 751 sensible urban areas. And these 751 areas are the lost territories of the French Republic today, even though 5 million people, or 8% of the total French population, lives there. In Brussels, the capital of the European Union, 25% of the population is Muslim. The city has several predominantly Islamic districts. Police officers entering those neighborhoods have been shot at with Kalashnikovs. The police union acknowledges the fact that there are many boroughs in Brussels which, I quote, officers do not dare to enter in uniforms. And there is, ladies and gentlemen, not only the threat of terrorism and violence, there is also the phenomenon of non-violent jihad. The rise of Islam means the rise of Islamic Sharia law in our judicial systems. In Europe, we have Sharia wills, Sharia schools, Sharia banks, and in the United Kingdom, in Britain, they even have official Sharia courts. Now, one of these courts recently settled the inheritance of a man whose possessions had to be divided between his children, and it gave the sons twice as much as the daughters, because the Quran, as we all know, says that a woman is only worth half a man. An official ruling by an officially accepted court in Europe and Britain today. And I ask myself, do you want all this to happen in Australia? Answer me, would you like to have this to happen in Australia? If you don't want it to happen in Australia, you have to act today. And the first thing you have to do is to inform yourself, to inform your friends, to inform the people who live in Australia about the situation in Europe, and yes, about the nature of Islam. And I know it's a constant struggle to preserve our faith, our family, and our freedoms. But we owe it. We owe it not only to ourselves, but to our children. And that is why we must always stand firm and never, ever let any part of our country become Islamic. We have to fight against it. Women, Christians, Jews, atheists, apostates, they are all the victims of Islam. And what people need to realize is that Islam, rather than a religion, is a political, totalitarian ideology. It aims for an Islamic state. It wants to impose Sharia law on all of us. It's not voluntary. It commands that people who leave Islam must be killed. And your fellow Australian, the theologian Mark Dury, has said, and I quote, Islam classically demands a political realization, and specifically one in which Islam rules over all other religions, ideologies, and competing political visions. Islam is not unique in having a political vision or speaking to politics, but it is unique in demanding that it alone must rule the whole political sphere. Ladies and gentlemen, before I continue, I want to make clear that I make a distinction between the people and the ideology. I do not have a problem with Muslims. There are many moderate Muslims, but there is no such thing as a moderate Islam. And I repeat, there is only one Islam, and that is a dangerous ideology. It is intolerant, it is violent, and as long as Islam remains dominant, there can be no real freedom anywhere. Just look what is happening today in the Arab world. The so-called Arab Spring quickly degraded into a cold and dark Arab winter. The situation of women, of non-Muslims, such as Christians, worsened dramatically. In Islamic countries, democracy does not lead to freedom. Islam keeps people entrapped in a mental prison. A survey by the American Pew Center found that while 59% of the Egyptians said that they prefer democracy to any other form of government, 84% of the same people want and demand the death penalty for apostates. This is democracy in Egypt. And I have traveled myself throughout the whole Islamic world, from Turkey to Egypt, from Iran to Iraq, from Afghanistan to Indonesia, and I've met very much friendly people. But people who reject Islam's cruel and barbaric commandments are not practicing moderate Islam. They are not practicing Islam at all. And that is the truth. And that needs to be said, because it's the only tool we have got. We stand for our convictions, but we never use violence. We abhor violence. We are Democrats and believing in peaceful solutions. And the fact that we abhor violence is exactly the reason why we reject Islam, because Islam is violent by nature. And our commitments to the truth, to human dignity, and to a just and honorable defense of the West does not allow us to use violence, but does not allow us also to give in to cynicism or despair. We cherish the tradition of Alexander Solzhenitsyn, of Yelena Bonner, of Lech Walesa, and of Ronald Reagan. These heroes, all heroes, they defeated a totalitarian ideology by the power of their conviction, by using no other means than their own words. And it is no use. It is no use raising a sword against darkness. As I said, we have to lit the light of the truth. And the truth will set us free. And the truth is that while Muslims can embrace freedom, Islam cannot. Never Islam can embrace freedom. And that is why Islam is such a threat. And now let me give you some reasons why Islam cannot be reformed. It cannot be reformed because it believes that the Quran is a book written directly by Allah himself. And it cannot because it calls on Muslims to follow Muhammad as the role model for their personal life. And this is why it's so important. 1.5 billion people in the world have to see Muhammad as their role model. And that's why we cannot afford not to look on who Muhammad was, what he did, what a kind of person he is. And my friends, let me tell you, there could not be a worse model than this man. Muhammad was a warlord. He was a terrorist. Yes, he was a pedophile. He was somebody who lived 14 centuries ago, but would he have lived today, he would have been sent to jail for life at least. And look at the consequences that taking Muhammad as a role model has. Because Muhammad abused women, including children, some followers of Islam feel entitled to treat women in the same way. Because Muhammad lied and cheated in order to advance Islam, some followers feel entitled to do the same. They even have a special word for it called taqiyya. Because Islam robbed non-Muslims, Muhammad robbed non-Muslims personally, some of his followers feel, with this example, that they have the right to do the same. Because Muhammad had his critics, and the critics of his Islamic State murdered, some of his followers feel entitled to kill everyone who speaks his mind about Islam and Muhammad. And while most people, most Muslims, are moderate people, those who think that they have to follow Muhammad's example are not. And that is exactly the reason why the more Islam one gets in a country, the more unfree and violent it becomes. Look in Europe. Look at my own country, the Netherlands. Moroccans, as you perhaps know, Moroccans are the largest Islamic group in the Netherlands. Almost every week, almost every day, there are incidents with Moroccan youth. In the Netherlands, 65% of all Moroccan boys between the age of 12 and 23, 65%, have been arrested at least once by the police. The list of violent incidents is endless. And the victims, ladies and gentlemen, the victims are never Moroccans and are never Muslims. 2 years ago, Christina Schröder, a government minister from Germany, advocated, I quote, an open debate about racist Muslims. End of quote. And last September, Jean-François Copé, a former French budget minister under President Sarkozy, also pointed out that racism is growing in our cities. And he too was talking about Islamic racism. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends of Australia, make no mistake, Islam has also arrived in Australia. Indeed, it already did. Your country too is facing a stealth jihad, an Islamic attempt to introduce Sharia law bit by bit. How else can one explain that a Muslim enclave is being built in the northwestern Sydney suburb of Riverstone, offering 100% of halal housing? That some Sydney restaurants, as I am informed, have gone completely halal. That the Sydney Sheikh performs female genital mutilation. That women walk around in niqabs. That banks offers financial services compliant with Sharia. That in Sydney today, separate and segregated swimming hours are available for Muslim women. That universities in Sydney cater for Sharia demands of students, while at the same time those universities refuse to allow me to speak at their premises. But most dangerous of all are the attempts of governments all over our Western societies to draft bills that restrict our freedom of speech. And of course that's done under the pretext of discrimination or hate speech. And I tell you, if people lose the right to free speech, none of the other liberties are safe anymore. Because we will no longer be able to let the light of freedom shine, and we will have lost the only tool we have got to resist the dark forces of Islam, is to be able to tell the truth. And I say, let there be light. Let no one, also not the Australian government, silence you. As a matter of fact, what we need, my friends, is a spirit of resistance. Resistance to evil is our moral duty. This resistance begins with expressing our solidarity to all Christians, to all Jews, to all non-Muslims, yes, to Muslim apostates, to all people who are the victims of Islam. We can see what Islam has in store for us if we watch the fate of the Christians in the Islamic world, such as the Copts in Egypt, the Maronites in Lebanon, Canaanites in Lebanon, the Assyrians in Iraq, and the Christians elsewhere, such as the brave Christian people in Nigeria. Almost every day, churches are burnt and Christians are assassinated in Islamic countries. Even in so-called moderate countries as Turkey and Indonesia, Christians face discrimination and humiliation on a daily basis. And the cause, ladies and gentlemen, the cause of all this Christian suffering is nothing else but Islam. Islam is to blame and nothing else. Rivers of tears are flowing from the Middle East, where there is only one haven. And I always show my sympathy for the only country in the Middle East where there is a democracy, a rule of law, and where we share our values, the state of Israel. Israel is a beacon of light in an area of total darkness.
Hallelujah.
If Israel falls, ladies and gentlemen, make no mistake, if Israel falls, we too will suffer the consequences. As a matter of fact, Israel is fighting our fight, because mothers in Israel lay awake at night wondering about their children in the army. Our mothers can sleep safely at night. We should support Israel in any way. As a matter of fact, we all are Israel. My friends, always remember that our voice is the voice in the cause of the free. It's the voice of liberty. Let us defend our own freedom. And let us support Muslims, and especially the suppressed Muslim women who want to free themselves from the yoke of Islam. If they manage to overcome their fears and throw off the shackles of Sharia, our world will be a better place for them, also for us. I say let them convert to Christianity. Let them become an atheist or any other religion as long as they leave Islam. Let them join the worldwide community of liberty. Renounce Sharia, renounce Islam. Be free as we are free. Let them liberate themselves from Islam. My friends, there is another important topic we must address, and this topic is called immigration. In our present societies, Islam spreads through the method of immigration from Islamic countries. Muhammad himself, if you look at the history of Islam, Muhammad himself conquered Medina through the method of immigration. It's called Hijrah. My friend Sam Solomon, who just spoke to you, wrote an excellent book about that. Hijrah, an instrument of jihad, a method that Islam uses to dominate the free world. And that is why there is no alternative than to stop all immigration from Islamic countries, whether we like it or not. We should also counter Sharia and Islamic law. Through Sharia, Islamic societies exert a tight social control that is indicative of the totalitarian character of Islam. And that is why we must never allow the establishment of a parallel Sharia-dominated society within our own communities. Unfortunately, Europe's Islamic lobby has already successfully pressured European politicians into implementing pro-Islamic policies, institutionalizing Sharia practices, restricting freedom of speech. In the Netherlands, my own country, we even have prison cells where the authorities painted arrows on the floor directing towards Mecca, so that the inmates know to which direction they should pray. We have prison cells in Holland where only halal food is served. We have Islamic lawyers who do not want to rise when the judges enter the courtroom. We have schools that close on Islamic holidays. We have works of art that are removed from public buildings because they might offend Muslims. We have, as you have here, separate swimming hours, but we also have separate theater performances, separate courses for men and women, nurses in the home for the elderly who are exempt for treating men because Islam forbids that. This is what we have and what will happen here as well. And Islamic and pro-Islamic groups drag people to court simply because they exercise their freedom of speech. And that is called legal jihad. People like myself, but also people like Lars Hedegaard in Denmark and countless others from Austria to Canada have been subjected to endless time, energy and money consuming trials for speaking the truth about Islam. It has even happened in Australia with 2 pastors, as you might remember, who were dragged to court for their remarks about Islam. And I say we have to end this charade. Let the law protect us against Islam instead of selling us out to it. That is the great Russian author Alexander Solzhenitsyn, a hero of the fight against communist totalitarianism in the past century, wrote, and I quote, that the truth is seldom sweet and almost invariably bitter. But here it is, my friends, the uncomfortable truth which your politicians do not want you to hear, but which must be spoken. What is happening in Europe today might happen, will happen to you in Australia tomorrow. Indeed, if you are not vigilant, it will happen to you tomorrow. So I urge you, once again, learn the lessons from our experience in Europe. How did we Europeans get into our present situation? And listen carefully, because I fear you are about to make the same mistake that we made in Europe. Apart from opening the doors, the immigration, the mass immigration from Islamic countries, we foolishly in Europe adopted the ideology of cultural relativism. Cultural relativism, even worse than multiculturalism. Cultural relativism is the ideology that advocates that all cultures are equal. Cultural relativists hold that the state should not promote a core culture which immigrants must accept if they want to live in our midst. And I believe that the state has the duty to define and to call upon a dominant culture. In Australia, as in Europe, this core culture, as what the Germans call a Leitkultur, is based on the West Judeo-Christian and humanist values. But nowadays, our intellectuals, our politicians, and the media as well adhere to the anything goes policy of cultural relativism. And this cultural relativism made us tolerate the intolerant. And now, intolerance is annihilating tolerance. And ladies and gentlemen, this has to stop. We must reaffirm. We must reaffirm our attachment to the Judeo-Christian and humanist principle. And I believe we must write it down in our constitution. If you don't know who you are, you do not know and cannot fight what you are not. We must be very clear. We derived our Western civilization from Jerusalem, from Athens, and from Rome. And let us never ever derive anything from Mecca. And let us be very clear once again. We must, in the name of tolerance, claim the right not to tolerate the intolerant anymore. We should stop it. Let no one tell you that Islam respects freedom. Let no one tell you that Islam is a religion of peace. Let no one tell you that you should tolerate the intolerant. We must stop being tolerant to an ideology that is intolerant to us. Let us draw the line. No more immigration from Islamic countries, for we have enough Islam in the West today. Enough is enough. Let us draw the line. No more mosques. Do you read my lips? No more mosques. Let us draw the line. All criminal immigrants or asylum seekers with dual nationality have to be stripped of their Western nationality and citizenship and be expelled from our country. If you adhere to our values, if you behave according to our constitutions, you are welcome to stay. But if you don't, there is the door, and we send you back. 7 years ago, in my home country, the Netherlands, I founded on those principles the Party for Freedom. I founded it to say exactly those things which other parties were and still are afraid to say. No Sharia in Holland. Never bow to Islam. No more mosques in our society. No more immigration, whether you like it or not, from Islamic countries. Let them adapt our values or stay away. It's a simple statement. Many politicians, and I must say, unfortunately, also here in Australia, from Labour to your Liberal Party, almost every federal Australian political party shy away from taking a stand against Islam. And why do they do that? Either because they are politically correct and frightened, or perhaps they foolishly believe in the equality of all cultures, or maybe they hope to cash in on the Islamic swing vote. I don't know. Whatever the reason, it's wrong and it's irresponsible. What we are witnessing today is how they let freedom die, because they are unwilling to defend it, because they are ignorant and full of political opportunism. But today, my friends, we must make it our finest hour. We must confront cowards with the truth. We must confront ignorance with the truth. We must confront opportunism with the truth. What we need, I cannot say it enough, is a spirit of resistance. And this is why freedom of speech